The idea here is to take one of the most boring subjects in journalism and make it exciting, which can be done. And okay, you ready? The idea is to start from the boring and work to the exciting. We're talking about the world of anti-dumping litigation. It's about tariffs. Does anybody here, have you ever written a story about an anti-dumping case? Do you even know anything about it? Like, I certainly did not when I started. So who's written dumping stories? Yeah. Yes. 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 This is the case I'm going to talk about is not really the pipe and tubes, although those are great cases. Ammonium nitrate. But the first thing, here's how this world of anti-dumping legislation is called. And I'll tell you what dumping is in just a second. But you're starting here, ignorant as I was in the 1980s when I'd never heard of these cases. This is a story, I think it's Reuters or something. U.S. tariffs on Ukrainian fertilizer to stay in place. ITC rules. ITC is the U.S. International Trade Commission. And it talks about the federal government, that's the U.S. government, has decided to keep tariffs on uranium exports of ammonium nitrate, even though the fertilizer is now cheaper to produce in the U.S. And this story is a relatively short one. It's just technical about tariffs and duties, dated May 2013. So it's current news. This is the case when I talked in the first hour about where the journalistic irony is it's the U.S. on the wrong side of the rule of law and Ukraine on the right side of the rule of law. And to explain what I mean by that requires just a little semi-technical background. If you go to your economics textbooks, which I never did because I dropped the course, but I've read them recently, you'll see a paragraph on price discrimination and international price discrimination. Has anybody heard of that? Well, good, because real people shouldn't have to. Price discrimination is called cutthroat pricing, ruthless competition, where you'll go into a supermarket and bananas will be sold below cost to attract customers. Bananas, cigarettes, something just to get people into the store. Oranges, the store will lose money because they're price discrimination, meaning they're cutting their prices, selling at a loss even. They'll lose money in that, but once you're in the store, you'll hopefully buy a lot of other things. And it's a praiseworthy part of capitalism because it promotes competition. And Coca-Cola will compete with Pepsi, and they're at it, and it's basically the same product, but they fight by cutting costs and having sales. If I hate to use American examples too much, but you can translate the Ukrainian. If General Motors makes a car in Detroit and has to lose money because nobody's buying it, it can sell the car at below cost or even a loss in California. Price discrimination, it's good. It keeps our economy going. The only thing wrong with that would be if you'd have what is called predatory pricing, meaning I'm a big guy, I'm going to sell at a loss until I drive you out of business because you can't take the pressure, and then I'll raise my prices and have what economists call market power, monopoly power. But price discrimination is generally a good thing, except when it's international price discrimination, it becomes dumping. and it's unfair. You go to the website of the U.S. Department of Commerce, which is shut down now because of our Congress. But you go to the website of the U.S. Department of Commerce, there's a bureaucracy that has just changed its name called the Import Administration. It exists to fight unfair foreign competition. The unfair is when General Motors would build that same car in Canada, sell it in the United States at a loss, it would be dumping, and you tax it. So the anti-dumping litigation is when companies go to the U.S. government or any government and seeks to keep out foreign competitors, saying, gee, they're just selling their stuff to our consumers too cheaply, and it's considered unfair. It's an intellectually dishonest racket. It's a protectionist racket. Economists do not respect these laws. People like Mark Levinson would agree with that, and every solid economist you'll ever meet for the rest of your life. The laws, however, have a political justification because of the theory that if you keep out the foreign competition a little bit and you're restrained, you're protecting jobs and relieving political pressure so people don't go to the barricades and blame the foreigners for all their troubles. Because the bottom line in all these trade cases is somebody files them because they're afraid of the foreign competition. Catfish, if we talked about. So the way it works is that the U.S. petitioners who file these cases win maybe 95% of the time. I can't think offhand when they've lost. That's why you're on the rule of law when you're defending yourselves in one of these cases, because the way the numbers are calculated by the bureaucrats is to make sure the foreigners lose. And then there's an independent agency called the U.S. International Trade Commission. They decide whether the quote dumped goods that the Commerce Department has said are dumped, they decide whether or not there's been injury to an American petitioner. And the injury means the petitioner's losing money, and so then the dumping duties will be entered into law. A reform when the WTO was created in 1995 was that there would be a review every 5 years of these old dumping cases to clear them off the books when the economics change. Well, in 2001 or whatever, there was a dumping case filed against ammonium nitrate from Ukraine. And the Commerce Department crunched the numbers. Ukraine lost. There were dumping duties assigned. And the case was reviewed 5 years later. And by then, the Ukrainians weren't even selling ammonium nitrate in the U.S. market. And they were found guilty again because they said there's a likelihood you'll do it again. You're a dumper, and once a dumper, always a dumper. And just this last year, in I guess July or May, for 10 years now you have this, and Ukraine has been knocked out of the U.S. ammonium nitrate market. Ammonium nitrate is stuff that is made from natural gas, and the prices for natural gas have been falling in the United States compared to 10 years ago. There's just, find an economist who will tell you this makes economic sense, and don't trust them if they try to tell you that, because it just is illogical. It's bizarre. And that's why I said the U.S. is on the wrong side of the rule of law here. It's so bad that Ukraine, you have a soccer team? Football? Is it just called what, Ukraine? Okay. Okay. Well, if Ukraine would play Arsenal in the World Champions, huh? Okay. Well, I'm an Arsenal fan. It's a family thing. Our son lives in London, and I have to be an Arsenal fan. And I hate Man United. Just, huh? 2-1. What if you had played to a 3-3 tie? Who would have won? A 3-3 tie. Who would have won? It's a trick question. Of course, nobody, right? If you go in a dumping case to the U.S. International Trade Commission, there are 6 commissioners. If they split the vote 3-3, guess who wins? The Americans. That's how fair these laws are designed to fight unfair trade practices. Any story you write for the rest of your lives on journalism, you can note this system, especially watch for the 3-3 ties. In the ammonium nitrate case, I think it was 6-0. Ukraine lost. Ukraine didn't even show up at the Commerce Department because they had figured out over the years that it was useless. And why spend $1 million hiring a lawyer when you're going to lose anyway? They thought they had a better chance at the International Trade Commission, where there is some semblance of economic reality among the commissioners. Their problem is that even if they were David Ricardo and Adam Smith, they'd have to vote protectionist if they're honest, because the laws are written that way, and if you follow the laws, the foreigners are going to be guilty most of the time. And believe me, they know that. I mean, I know these people, and they won't say it in public, but everybody knows it in Washington. You ask the U.S. officials about this, oh, well, Congress in its wisdom wrote the laws, but the laws were written by the lawyers for the domestic industries, the catfish guys, the steel guys, the clothing people, textile lobby, and so forth. So all I said hopefully would make some sense, because I'm talking like I would to my next door neighbor who doesn't pretend to be an economist. So, but if you pick up this book, which there's a wonderful online resource in the U.S. government that will give you the entire file on ammonium nitrate. You can see what the lawyers from each side argued, and then there's a book that's published, and this has everything in it. And it used to take me 3-4 weeks. I'd read these and I'd figure them out and study and worry. Now I can do it in 15 minutes because I know where to look. I ought to pass this around, and you can see it's not as boring as it looks. You look for who the U.S. petitioner is, and there are 2 U.S. petitioners who want to control the U.S. ammonium nitrate market here. You go to their web page, and you see how they boast of all their profits quite often, or you see if they themselves import stuff from China or other countries and they just want to keep the Ukrainians out. There's always something like that going on. You'll see numbers on the value of imports. The name of the Ukrainian company that would like to export ammonium nitrate is on the record, so one never knows in journalism what one's relations are with corporations. But even if your company here isn't forthcoming with the press, and it may or may not be, many American companies are not, even when they're the good guys. It's just the way they are. But the name of it is here. You'll find some information, and then it gets easy, because the U.S. International Trade Commission will have a public hearing in every one of these cases, and the lawyers for both sides will lay out their best arguments, and it's in English that's understandable. And all you do is get these things. And unfortunately right now, because of the U.S. government shutdown, the websites are all dark, and so I'm fumbling a lot. And Natalia had this one printed, and then I printed part of it. But when you wrote did you cover ammonium nitrate? Did you quote the Ukrainian government? No, somebody talking, explaining how outrageous this is.
Our government control a lot of private business, so we can either the Ministry of Economics or association of those who unite those ammonium producers.
Okay, so then it's easier than I'd suspected. You just never know when you're dealing with these people because sometimes they will and sometimes they won't.
And recently, our ammonium industry was almost monopolized because one man bought all the rights. So he's trying to monopolize the industry.
Uh, well,
So 50%, I think he has about 50% of land.
well, that reminds me that there are no virgins in international trade. I mean, no virgins in international trade, But this guy, monopolist or not, is fighting other monopolists and from the U.S. And on this side, I don't care who he is; he's on the right side.
The other issue is he's relatively small. His share on the market is 6.5%, but he is united with Russian producers that have rich resources of gas, and so together they can shape the situation in the world. So I think they're quite influential on this side. So I think you're an American side may be right doing that. Do that.
Yes, yes. This is from the public hearing. I'm not going to bore you and read everything, but there's testimony here from Natalia Kolmakova. She's the Deputy Director of WTO Trade Remedies Department of the Ministry of Economic Development and Trade. And Yuri Karchenko, Chief Expert of Negotiations and Market Access Division of WTO. They're both from the Embassy of Ukraine in Washington, D.C., and they testified with the help of a translator. So I don't know why they'd need a translator if they're stationed in Washington, but they explain here how the original dumping case was based on one economic set of assumptions that ammonium nitrate was cheaper to produce here than in the United States, and now the situation was reversed, and Ukraine still loses. That's the outrage. I mean, that's your nut. So it's all here. The Ukrainian industry has an anti-dumping lawyer named Marty Levin, who's been around. He's probably as old as I am, maybe older, and I mean he knows a lot. And his best argument is here. And the lawyer for the American industry, Valerie Slater, from a big law firm, Aiken Gump. She's very smart, very knowledgeable, and you can find her best argument here. So even if Val or Marty don't talk to you, you've got it. You've got the story, the people talking right in here, and it's their best arguments. And so when you write it, you're safe because you've been fair to both sides. I mean, you'll conclude. It's pretty hard to write this without pointing the obvious irony that Ukraine is, it's just the case is ridiculous, and you can find people to say that, and it's that easy. It just takes a little bit of work. You dig into these cases, as I said, they're involve the rubber extruded rubber thread that holds up your underwear, the chemical that goes into your toothbrush. You just go one at a time. One case. It took me years to figure this out. I kept looking for what was unfair that the foreigners were doing, because Colombia with roses, what was unfair? They had sunshine. You go into any American supermarket and you see flowers today from Colombia and Central America, and you can afford them. But I kept looking, what are the foreigners doing wrong? And once in a while, maybe they were a little dicey, but rarely. And the all-American presidents are confident that when they meet the presidents of countries like Ukraine or anybody, those presidents won't have the nerve or the confidence to point out the absurdities here. And so the bureaucracy goes on year after year. The foreigners go in there, they pay money for the lawyers, they lose. And if you read the article I wrote in one of the columns in the Wall Street Journal Asia. Headline was "Nailed." It's about a case against nails from China, and it's the same kind of ridiculous situation. I mean, nails. I mean, if you can't make nails in the United States that compete with China, I mean, forget it. But after the Chinese lost the nails case, you began to see plain white boxes of nails show up in Korea, and then they were sent on to the United States labeled product of Korea. So the dumping cases don't even work for the Americans, because the trade will continue, whether it's illicit or otherwise. We cut out shrimp, and from 4, 5, 6 countries, well, there are 18 other countries that can supply the market. So the cases don't work for anybody. I was going to copy for you an article I wrote about the original ammonium nitrate case against Ukraine, except when I read it, I saw that my anger got the better of me, and I just used not intemperate language or like Rush Limbaugh or people you might have heard of, but you know, I just said it would be ridiculous, and if I had to write it over, I'd be more careful and make the same points. But if you punch in my name in ammonium nitrate, you'll see it, and the only reason to do so is that I quote several American farmers who complain that, gosh, we use ammonium nitrate to buy fertilizer, and so the cost of our fertilizer is going to increase, and this is not good for American farmers. So the U.S. government is picking the proverbial winners and losers. The winners are these two companies that dominate the market, the fertilizer market, and the losers are the rest of us. And it's that's basically all it is there. Once you start in these cases, if they look boring, look for what's interesting. What's the product? That's the first thing when you pick up one of these books. It'll say what the product is, and something like sebacic acid that you never heard of. It puts the bristle in the toothbrush. Well, that means, so it's in everybody's life. And who would know when you brush your teeth that you're part of a trade war involving the U.S. and the Chinese? And the only other thing, and then I'm going to let you alone or let you ask any questions or respond. You'll hear in every one of these cases the powerful rhetoric that the foreigners are unfair, and the best way to understand it is to look at the U.S. Shrimp cases, like the catfish that we talked about. The Vietnamese aren't doing anything unfair, but the American shrimp industry is from North Carolina down around Florida over in the Gulf of Mexico to Texas. And all the wild shrimp that they go out and catch in their boats could not supply Walmart, could not supply one U.S. restaurant chain. The foreign shrimp is aquaculture. And there are about 20 countries, and they farm it, and they grow their shrimp. All the quantities, the qualities, the consistency. You go into the grocery stores and you see these shrimps. They're all the same size in these round dishes. I had some in my hotel last night, so I know they're here. And the Americans entered the 21st century unable to compete with the foreigners. So what do they say? The foreigners are unfair. Let's hit them with dumping tariffs. And so that's basically the formula is the same in every dumping story. There's somebody whining about competition that he's not prepared to win. It's like a grade school soccer team playing the pros. We Americans are not always the most efficient in some of these industries. So I think they're fun stories. And what I've just told you is information or a formula for journalism that I'm about it when it comes to dumping. You'll see stories on the wires like the one here in ammonium nitrate, but they're not. They don't have time to dig in. The editors don't say to the reporters, "Spend a week and expose the ironies and dig in." The New York Times hardly covers the cases. The Post. They're just invisible. but they're good stories. You get beyond the major the quality newspapers, out to the newspapers around the United States, and they don't know this stuff. So I can imagine what it's like elsewhere.
So, are there any criteria how to define an interesting dumping story to investigate? How do they choose the story? Or just any dumping story could be a possible source for?
The way it started for me is when I didn't even know what all this world was like, and I saw that there was a fight over roses, and I went down to the CBS Evening News. And those were the days when when the evening news was not tabloid journalism, and they actually did reporting. And I just said, hey, Mother's Day's coming up. Did you know the rose you buy for Mother's Day is part of a trade war? And they thought that was great, and they sent a producer down to Miami. And then the American rose growers said, well, these roses come from Colombia, so they probably have heroin in there or cocaine. So I was afraid the CBS people would buy it. But again, they were better journalists in those days. I don't know how they'd cover it today, but don't get me started on American television. But that's how you do it. There's your fights over products in your lives, the clothes you wear, like the suit that I talked about from Sam's Tailor, and that's how you get your editor interested, because they don't care about all the economics and stuff. They just want to know if it's going to be interesting, and so you're writing about products that are in everybody's lives. That's, and don't get me started on how to attract editors' interests. Sometimes the editors I write for the Wall Street Journal understand this stuff.
Did I understand your point right? That there are ways that obvious, but they take much more time, but they are safer ways to get the same result as maybe to go like WikiLeaks did, or just go to some closed doors. There are some ways to read official documents, and if you spend enough time with that, you will get almost the same result.
I mean, as opposed to...
What you did a lot is you just sit and read a boring document for hours and hours, and then you just find something. So that's your approach is not to go into a door that is closed, not to talk to people that would not answer, but just go into some open source and find details.
Of course of course I have the sources. I know what I'm looking for. You won't see that in the stories. The journalism and intelligence operatives have a lot in common. We protect sources and methods just like they do. And you don't need secrets. I just call somebody up. You call lawyers for one of the sides and say, what's your strongest argument? I mean, what are they going to say? And the lawyers for the, quote, bad guys, and they're not bad. I mean, they're fighting for their self-interest. You can't blame them in that regard. They're using the laws. They know your attitude. They know my attitude, but they don't care if I just lay it out. Say, here's their best argument. Sometimes you don't have to laugh at it. It's pretty obvious. And in this case, if I were starting the ammonium nitrate case today, first thing I'd do would get the press clip that I showed you. That there's the news peg, and there's always a wire service story, and it will have the bare bones, the who, what, when, where, but it won't have the why, and it won't have the juicy details of how outrageous it is to. I mean, and your crane has lost the same case twice for opposite reasons. I mean, one of the times they should have won, right? I mean, logic would tell you that. The economics have changed since Ukraine first lost, so they still lose. So if you want to save time, go to the website of the U.S. International Trade Commission, usitc.gov, and you'll find a system called EDIS, E-D-I-S, and you have to figure out the website, and it's not the easiest. I had actually, to print these, I had to call somebody who's a very senior person, and I said, look, I can't get on the website, and I'm going to Kiev. And so this person copied or sent me the files, but he didn't know how to do it because he has a staff do it for him. But you can figure it out. You'll find a list of all the dumping cases involving your crane, the active ones, the closed ones. You'll find ammonium nitrate, and then you'll look in the filings, and I'd say within an hour, 2 hours at the max, even if you're slow, you'll find the public hearing. So after the wire service press clip or the press release that announces the case, then if you read this, and then you just look, there's an opening statement from the two lead lawyers for both sides. So within a few pages, you see their best arguments. And then you go to the websites of the companies, and you'll see what they say about their business. In the ammonium nitrate case, and I haven't had a time to really go over this carefully in the last week, but I think that one of the leading companies' website boasts of its profits now, and yet they still have an interest in. The last story I wrote on the U.S. and Vietnam's diplomatic relations, I read every CIA estimate from 1948 to 1975 when the Vietnam War was over. They're all declassified now. I just wanted to see what they were saying all the time. I read 2 books, history books. I called the author. We talked. I dug as deep as I could. And if you look at the story, and I write magazine-length stories, you're not supposed to do that on the internet, but when you have something that nobody else does, people read it. And in this case, the translator in the Oval Office for Obama, for the Vietnamese and Obama, when they met, the translator's father was Vietnam's most famous communist spy during the war. His cover was a reporter for Time and Reuters. And he loved the United States, but he loved his country. And a fascinating man. And now his son's in the San Francisco consulate and was the translator for the president of Vietnam meeting Obama just a month or so ago. And then one of the generals in the room had to, who is this guy? Where's he come from? Well, his father was one of the first generals after General Giap, who just died at age 102, and this general's father planned the famous Tet Offensive of 1968. And then the foreign minister who was there grew up hating America because he was lived in Hanoi, and he had to live through the bombing in the early 1970s when he was a little boy. But as soon as he became a diplomat, he has spent his whole career trying to improve relations with the United States, his former enemies. I mean, these are serious people. And the United States, Obama had Secretary of Commerce and the U.S. Trade Rep, and that was it, basically. And it was kind of embarrassing. That's, their knowledge is not this deep. So reading is important. Half of it is reading. The other half's talking to people and traveling. That's the third half. And okay,
How long does it take you to write an investigation story?
it used to take 2 or 3 weeks. My editors would put up with it because they were good stories. Now I can do them fast. I could figure it out in a day. And it might take a week because I'm a slow writer, and I like to think. I have no deadlines, and I'm old now, and I'm not really rich, but I'm kind of, and I don't have to work if I don't want to, and my wife makes me do things other than whisper in the telephone, like I talk to her, and go to lunch sometimes, baseball games. So, but it's worth it. I mean, every editor ought to have at least one person on the staff who really doesn't have anything to do but figure out cases that are complex and nobody else is going to take the time. And if you do that, and you do another one, say you do one a month, the end of the year you're going to have 12 cases. and you're going to have something that nobody else has done. And it's worth it. It takes time. And after a while, then you start to figure out the big picture about the high-level WTO politics and so forth. But if you start the other way around, and you try to do the high diplomacy, you won't know the details, and this is what they fight about. So my guess is that the major newspapers just have a question of resources, and they don't. A lot of the editors don't know economics like Mark Levinson. Again, I refer you back to The Economist. Those guys get it. And you'll see references to these cases there, and they figure it out. They don't write all the details because of space, but they're worth reading. And I have no connection with them, by the way. And,
Do you have your own opinion about what subjects or what products are of most interest to a reader? So you can say, oh, they will read this, and this is
well, if it's something like the thread that puts the snap in your drawstring, they'll read it. What holds my underwear up. The clothes, a suit from Sam, the tailor. The stuff that farmers need for fertilizer. Somebody will read it. Products involving steel are in everybody's daily lives. Refrigerators, anything made of metal, they're all over. Roses. I mean, who doesn't want to read about roses at Mother's Day or Valentine's Day?
So you mean you can do anything interesting for readers, just to find a way to do it?
They are interesting, and nobody's going to read these things. You just got to know what to look for. I went through my house. I wrote a story about my house and where everything came from. And I live in 70 miles west of Washington, D.C., up in a mountain. My wife and I have 9 acres of land, and we look out over the famous Skyline Drive, the Shenandoah Valley. It's really beautiful. And our county is as big as Singapore, but we only have 7,000 people. We don't have stoplights, not one stoplight. We don't have Starbucks, nothing. But our economy and the home that my wife and I built is a model of the international economy. Our front door is from Honduras, polished off in, I think, Costa Rica. The floors cherry wood from Brazil. There's a counter from granite from India. And then we have a bed from China that was subject to, I think, 200% anti-dumping tariffs because there's a big fight over bedroom furniture. And we have spruce wood in our house from Austria. So I asked the builder, why are you, why do you get spruce from Austria and bring it all the way from Eastern Europe across the Atlantic Ocean? And the guy said, well, the Canadians have been dumping softwood lumber and we can't find any spruce that we can afford. So think of that. The U.S. lumber lobby has been at war with Canada for years. I mean, their lawyers' children have been sent to very good private schools on this case for a long time. And the idea was to keep the jobs in Georgia, the U.S. Georgia, not the other Georgia. But the jobs didn't go from Canada to the southern United States. The jobs have gone to Austria, and I had to pay for this stuff. And so you don't need a lot of economics because the economics is pretty simple. Once you figure it out, you just look at what's in your life and what it costs and so forth. Is that enough? Too much?
How do you organize material? For instance, you read it, so you talk to people. Do you have a system to organize it, to put it together? Do you have everything? Do you have everything in mind?
I do the same thing you did yesterday on your stories. Why am I writing this? What's important? What's the nut of the thing? And I'm not really very good. I'll sit. It might take me a week sometimes. I sit down all day, think, because these cases are so complex that not just this, but when I'm reading books and CIA declassified estimates and all that, it takes a while. And I get a pile like that, and then I write it without even looking at it and just pull things out. And I don't know. But you got to know why it's important, why you're writing. It's the same thing as a shorter story. It just you have to concentrate. Like in soccer, you watch where you're going to kick, and it's the same formula for success. But and what drives you is a sense of injustice, or in the case of Ukraine, there are Ukrainians here who ought to be making money selling these products to the United States. And by the way, Ukraine has its own dumping laws, and they filed a case against American chickens. So the way it works is that the Americans send dumping petitions to Ukrainians. They better read them in English within 30 days or whatever the time is, or they're going to be derelict or late. So the Ukrainians then sent their dumping petition against the American chickens in Ukrainian. And we Americans aren't as good at languages as you are. And the American guys had to go translate it. All I know about that is that they got on a plane, flew to Kiev, and talked the Ukrainian chicken guys into withdrawing the case. And I don't know why. And that case happened in 2008. And of course, now your story is Ukraine is expanding exports to the European Union, and you have the issues with Russia that doesn't like that. But as an American reader, I would like to open the Kiev Post and read about the Ukrainian chicken farmers. There must be small ones who are having trouble competing globally, like chicken farmers everywhere. There are many chicken wars. South Africa's after the U.S. and Russia is, and you could write about chickens, and you could, there's a point where you'd have to stop. But I'd like to read more about the Ukrainian industry, and then there must be a globally competitive Ukrainian industry now, because you're going to be selling to the European Union. I just like to know who owns it and how many people are employed, and just there's a good business story to be written there without editorializing. But there's something about Ukrainian imports that they don't like, and I don't understand that. Maybe the times have changed and they're more competitive now. But it is funny. Imagine the Americans having to translate the Ukrainian dumping case in so many days, or they'd be late. And, so, does anybody want to tell me anything about? I see this map here. It says freedom of the press worldwide, and Ukraine's red, but here you are. So what happened? How do you get away with it? Like China? The U.S. is only yellow. I don't know. If you look at the map, though, our biggest neighbor is Canada. They're just like Americans, only nicer. They don't cut us off any energy supplies. Your neighbors, you're in a tough neighborhood. Yeah.
Because there were cases of censorship. There were cases where people were threatened to kill here. It's not mass, but in general there are cases of this. It's like
Yeah.
it used to be yellow a couple years ago. It changed.
could do to help. But I'm, of course, reminded when you said that I picked up the New York Times a few weeks ago, and here's Vladimir Putin writing, giving advice on how a liberal democracy should respond to Syria. And I thought, Putin, I mean, this is great. There's a great column. And I'm thinking, well, now you're a journalist. You better be careful. But, yeah.
Politicians sometimes write for American publications either.
Do they?
I recall articles by our president. I recall article by Yulia Tymoshenko while she was prime minister. I guess it was in the article, some British newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall article by former minister of economy. They do that because
Mm-hmm.
they clearly understand that it's crucial for their public image, for the international image, to have these publications, to show to declare their position on
Mm-hmm.
certain issues. So that's why they do it.
You know, to get back to it, the only advice I can think of is think of the Philippines, where you had these young reporters who didn't know what they were doing in 1986 when the Marcos dictatorship was overthrown, and now one of my friends wrote a book about the Supreme Court, and it led to the conviction, impeachment, and removal of the Supreme Court justice. It wasn't solely because of my friend's book, but it was because she has a new president who's actually honest in the Philippines, and just being honest has gotten that country going again, and people are talking about it, and so it might take, I don't know how many years it'll take you, but it could happen here. You might actually get somebody, who will take up, and then the change can be faster than you imagined, and who knows? You can't predict. It might take the rest of your career, but it could happen. That's why we're doing this. Yeah. You know.
Also, the media market in Ukraine is quite small when compared to neighboring countries, not even mentioning the US. US media market is huge. And I
Yeah.
think that major American publications are quite profitable. They're successful businesses, while even most Ukrainian publications, they are not successful as businesses. Their business model does not bring too much of profit. It's usually not even profit, but losses for their owners. That's why things are kind of going not right way.
Difficult. I don't know how profitable some of the U.S. papers are, though, because the technology has changed everything. Washington Post is now has a new owner. Um, you know, I think our journalism will survive because it's in our DNA. Now you just have to create more of your DNA here. I don't know what, I mean, that's why you're here. You wouldn't be picked to be these fellows if you didn't have something special. Every one of you, you're here for a reason. So how to open their eyes? Legal Times was owned by Stephen Brill. I don't know if you know the name. Brilliant journalist, driven. He loved it when we'd write articles that he'd get calls complaining about me all the time. I never knew it until I left. And then he told me, and he said, be tough, but be fair. And if he caught me, putting the thumb on the scales, he wouldn't have put up with it. But when he could see I was right, and then of course he had much more influence because he was honest. Much more, because whoever the oligarchs is the accepted word. Whoever these managers are trying to please, or the owners, they know that, and they know you're weak, and they own you. But if it's just better to be honest. It's actually easier, and you achieve your real goal. How you explain it to these guys, it's not easy. Yeah.
And for many owners of publications here in Ukraine, media is not a business. For them, it's an instrument of influence, and they don't want profit from it. They want to have influence on public opinion, and most of the owners, they are close to political party which is in power, and that's why they influence the opinion of the readers in a very certain
great. If they don't care about profits, say, put me on a plane to Bali. I want to report on these important, there's 3 or 4 stories there, and you want readers, I'll get your readers. Just put me on that plane. And then once you're there, you get plugged into this international network, and pretty soon you're free. Yeah. Just say, actually that is, isn't it? I got fired once by a U.S. senator for running an investigation that he asked me to do. His name's Tom Eagleton. He had run for vice president with George McGovern in 1972. And he wanted me, after I left the Intelligence Committee, I wanted to become a journalist and wrote stories. And within about 6 months, I ran out of money. And because I didn't know journalism, and it was hard. And so he created a subcommittee for me. It was the subcommittee on the District of Columbia. And that has nothing to do with foreign affairs. So he changed the name, Subcommittee on District of Columbia and Efficiency in Government. And that was my license to do foreign affairs. And so the first investigation was on the U.S. agriculture exports, and there was an agency that controlled the rice trade and the other things. I can't even remember the name of it offhand, but it was really lousy. Typical bureaucratic rat's nest. And so I read and studied, and I finally went down to see one of the top people in the agriculture department. And I said, well, I've read this, and what about it? And he said, oh, thank God somebody from Congress has come down here to ask. This drives me crazy. And he told me the whole story. And the problem for me was that the reason for the mess was my senator's colleagues in Congress, people he had to deal with. And so he fired me. I went in, I said, well, we got this investigation, and it's Congressman Whitten and the others you have to worry about, and he thought about it, and so he did the logical thing and decided that I should no longer be in his employ. So I wrote a magazine article about it, why Senator Eagleton fired me. And I was going to wait for my memoirs, but I'm already old and probably will never write them. And I thought it was a good story then, and it might not have helped any political ambitions. So who cares? Don't have to work for politicians. I only write once a month, and I didn't write last month because I only write now when it's important or I go out and speak or something. And when I write, I'll probably get 70 countries and maybe 40,000 pages viewed in a few days. The BBC Vietnamese service translates my Vietnamese stuff, and they got 100,000 pages viewed. So I'm small, but it's enough. And especially with the audience, I mean, the people who read it sometimes are very well connected, and you never know. When I worked for the Intelligence Committee, I was like 29 years old and drew up the investigative agenda for the whole committee. And it was based on an idea I had from a magazine article in the Washington Monthly. Some whistleblower from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he made a good point about what's wrong with U.S. intelligence, the analysis. And he never knew, but his magazine article that he probably got paid $150 for influenced a whole congressional investigation. So you never know. I don't worry about that. If it's a good story, you write it in a paper napkin, and sooner or later it'll get out. At some point, as a journalist, you only care about getting the story and writing it. You don't, whatever happens. I mean, what are you going to say? It's just fun, and you can't stop. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? The basic ingredient for any good reporter is that instinct. You can't teach it. What you teach are the skills, how to do the nuts, the organizing, where are the sources, and then you're on your own. And but without that instinct, and a sense of fairness helps. You probably all have editors. You go in there excited about something, you see it's wrong. Oh, I don't know. So I don't know what you do with these people. Just, This is all being recorded, right? So, so, you know,
My name is Anina, and we represent one of the civic movements in Ukraine here. And now I'm listening to you, and I see that you are talking about things that are inherent for a journalist, any writing people, right? Inherent. But what about some facts or things standing like outside? How can you explain that in the world, globally, many relevant, really most relevant facts are left underreported or maybe non-reported, but they are eclipsed by many other unnecessary or maybe really very, very shallow facts?
well, Ukraine is part of the global economy, and we're going to talk tomorrow morning about the relations between national security and economics. The short, easy answer is I've tried to point to the WTO stories because Ukraine's actions in the WTO are aimed directly at complying with the rule of law, and that means more prosperity and stability. And other countries are reacting to what Ukraine has been doing in the WTO, so your stories are never local. And thinking insular is a mistake because just like my home out in the mountains of Virginia, there's stuff from I don't know how many countries there, and a lot of politics. There are pipes and tubes, maybe from Ukraine, stuff that we talked about here. So just it takes a little work to make the global connections. And one thing I did today was try to point the fellows. Are you fellows? In the direction of some of the sources in Geneva and Brussels and elsewhere. The Swedish government gets trade. They're really smart, and so once you start, you'll set up these networks, and you'll have maybe a different one for every story. But at some point, you're plugged in, and you think globally and report globally. Does that help at all?
Can you say that any Ukrainian journalists now report and think globally?
Well, I've never been here, and it takes me 3 days to know more than the local inhabitants how best to run their lives, and I've only been here 2 days. So I don't know, even though I'm an American. Huh? Tomorrow, yeah, right. Look, it's so easy for an American like me. All I do is criticize my government, and I said earlier, the more I do, the better off I am. So, I'm lucky. It doesn't take much moral courage to do what I do. You have to have real courage. Yeah. Yeah.
Stay here in Ukraine. We have a lot of topics to investigate, to cover.
Well, it's funny.
What we're going to do in America, everything is...
A week ago, I'd forgotten I wrote the ammonium nitrate case back in 2000 or whatever, and knew none of this, and just spent a whole week thinking, what would I do if I was a reporter there? And yeah, you're right. I could stay here, and they wouldn't kick me out for probably 6 months, maybe a year, but maybe they wouldn't. Yeah. But the stories really are here. I mean, this is a wonderful time in your country's history. What if you'd been born 50, 60 years ago? Well, your lives would be a lot different. So, no, these are good days for Ukraine. And as bad as they are, maybe the best you've had for a long, long time. There's opportunity. Americans are optimists, even though we're quite often proven wrong.
And did you cover any topics related to Soviet trade back in the years?
Not really. There wasn't much trade during the Cold War when I was starting. There's, I hate to get into this, enriched uranium. And there's several investigative pieces. After the Soviet Union collapsed, and Ukraine's involved in this, you're dismantling the weapons. The issue is what do you do with the uranium, and the United States set up the U.S. Uranium Enrichment Corporation, and I can't remember the details, but that corporation we set up did not make sense, and there have been articles written on it that are pretty good, actually. If you're interested in it, I could point you to a good magazine article on that in the Milken Institute Review. And I wrote one that Peter Purcell, who was with the New York Times then picked up when I was at Legal Times, and we helped each other. And so there are 3 or 4 articles that I could point you to on that. And I'm thinking of a case that's still fresh in some sense. That hasn't been resolved yet. If you get into that subject, you are going to have to spend some work, because my own stories are so complicated that I forget them, and I have to go and read and remember them all over again. But it's a very important subject, and in fact, it's the nexus of national security and economics, and I just don't remember enough to talk about it much tomorrow. But good luck if you start pulling the string. Yeah. Is that it?
Do we have to finish or we have some more time?
I'll stay as long as you want. I mean, they said 4 o'clock, but I mean.
But what's your opinion about shutdown? Do you believe that someday America will really come to default? Because every year we hear that the United States American economy will crash, and
I've been hearing my whole life that America was in decline. I mean, we looked pretty weak in the late 1930s. We looked weak at the First World War until we came in at the last minute. Vietnam, don't get me started. We made many mistakes, but I think nobody's ever gotten rich betting against us in the long run, because we are so strong. I mean, we have these silly politicians, and right now we're going through a period of second raters in both parties. And it's difficult, but we'll be okay.
so these are political issues, not economic.
Boy, I don't know. The American people are moderate and centrist for the most part, but you got people out on the fringes, and they're nut jobs and extremists. Not extremists in the sense of terrorist, just kind of loony, and they are dominating the political debate now because of the money. If you run for office, you appeal to those fringes, and so the center, nobody's governing from the center. The last American president who governed from the center was Bill Clinton, and then the television is hurting our country. You have cable. The main television networks have gone tabloid style. They do cutesy stories. They're not serious. And then you have MSNBC, the liberal network, and you turn them on, and all they do is make fun of Republicans. And then you have Fox Network, and they turn them on, and they just get you so angry about the Democrats, and they're appealing to these fringes, and it's not helpful. But we got The Economist, you got the FT, the Times, the Post, and you got to read half a dozen newspapers, and we're strong. So.
What publications do you usually read? And do you read them every day?
Yeah, I read the South China Morning Post, the FT, the Economist, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and Times. I read them first.
On the internet?
Mostly internet now. The Economist in print, just because I refuse to read that on internet. I like to carry it around and think about it. The New Yorker has excellent reporting. You got to watch them. They have a liberal bias, and I don't mind that. I mean, it's respectable. And then I read the Guardian. It has a liberal bias, and we don't see eye to eye on much, but they're respectable journalists. And they might come to the edge once in a while, with their advocacy, and then the wires. And then there are certain people I watch, so I just have their names, and when news comes up about them, I get it on Google. So it does take time. You've been talking to my wife, haven't you? She said, you read all this stuff, huh? No, I don't trust it if it's not real journalism, and I should do Twitter. I don't promote myself. I don't care. And if I did that, I'd have to get into the 24-hour news cycle, and that's the source of much of the lightweight reporting, because you have to keep producing, even if it doesn't make sense. And no, I take my time and do it right, or I find something else to do. So not everybody has that luxury. But if you get good stories and you get the editors to understand, I mean, like I said, my editors at Legal Times just said, look, just keep doing stories like that, corn growers. That's what we do here. Look for the sneak attacks. And once they let you loose, you're happy.
As far as I understand, shifting to an online platform became crucial for your reputation because not all readers doing that.
Well, when my wife and I moved out to the country 8 years ago, I just didn't need to work all the time, and it cost me money to print and mail and online. I have readers all over the world now, so that was the future. It's just that I didn't attempt to apply a business model, because if I write, like here, I'm in Ukraine on assignment to write a column for foreignpolicy.com. And so they'll pay me, and the journal pays, and their magazines and speeches. But if I get desperate for money, then I'll just work harder. But I'm old. That's why. I mean, I could retire. Yeah. So, yeah. Journalism is a rich man's game. That's the problem when you're a poor man and play it. You got to get lucky. But I got lucky. Yeah. Okay. Well, wow, thank you. Okay. All right.